Korean Bible Stories, Disc 4, Genesis chapter 29, Double Crossed. Jacob had tricked his brother and run away from home, fearing for his life. But God had spoken to him and promised to be with him even in his darkest moments. Now Jacob was heading for Haran, as his mother had advised. There, he could stay with his relatives, but he didn't know how to find them. So he sat down beside a well and he began talking to some local shepherds. They told him they were from Haran. They knew his uncle, Laban. Just at that moment, a young woman, a shepherdess, came down to the well, leading her flock. The shepherds told Jacob that she was Laban's daughter, Rachel. Jacob ran to move the big stone away from the mouth of the well, and he began to draw water for his uncle's sheep. Rachel looked at him in astonishment. Who was this kind man? Jacob gazed at him because he was so overcome with emotion. He began to cry.
Your father, Laban,
he told her,
is my uncle.
Rachel looked at the stranger, stained with dust. He was exhausted. His clothes were torn. Tears were rolling down his cheeks.
What? You're my cousin?
She asked.
Yes.
He nodded.
Tell your father that the son of Rebekah has come to see him.
Rachel ran home to her father Laban. He came rushing out to meet Jacob and kissed the young man. It was years since Laban had heard news of his beloved sister. Jacob told Laban everything that had happened, including how he had deceived his brother. And Laban looked at him shrewdly.
So,
he said, almost as if he was impressed by Jacob's deception of his brother.
you really are my flesh and blood.
And he hugged him again and called a feast for Jacob. Jacob worked for his uncle for a month. But then Laban came to him.
You're working without pay.
He said,
That can't be right for a nephew of mine. What do you want from me?
Now, Laban had 2 daughters, Leah, the older daughter, and Rachel. Leah's eyes were soft and tender, but pale in color, while Rachel was truly beautiful, and Jacob had fallen in love with her.
I'll work 7 years for you,
Said Jacob.
in exchange for your younger daughter, Rachel.
Laban thought for a moment.
Agreed.
He said.
Stay with me.
Jacob was overjoyed. He worked hard for 7 long years, but they seemed like only a few days to him because he loved Rachel so much. The time came for the wedding. Laban held a marriage feast, and afterwards Jacob took his bride, still in her veil, into the darkness of his home. They made love that night, but in the morning, when the sun streamed through the window, Jacob looked at the woman lying beside him. It was Leah. His uncle had deceived him, just as he had once pretended to be his older brother Esau. So Leah had pretended to be her younger sister with the help of her father, Laban. Jacob was devastated. He went to Laban.
What have you done to me?
He shouted.
I worked all those 7 years for you, and Rachel was my payment. And now you have deceived me.
Nephew,
said Laban calmly.
You have to understand our ways here. It's not our custom for the younger daughter to get married before her older sister.
Jacob stared at him. He could not believe that he had been so cleverly outwitted.
I tell you what,
Said Laban.
you can marry Rachel in 7 days as well, if you promise to work for me for another 7 years.
Jacob, who was deeply in love with Rachel, felt that he had no choice but to accept. He took Rachel to be his second wife and then worked for Laban for another 7 years.